They seated me behind the speakers at my niece's wedding, as if the deafening noise could possibly bother someone who's deaf like me. But that night, when I stood up and raised my hands instead of my voice, the entire hall rose in complete silence. Tears streamed down the bride's face as she realized what she had been missing all these years. They say a story should start at the beginning, but what was mine? Was it when my family decided a deaf child wasn't worth listening to? Or was it the moment I decided they were going to see me, whether they wanted to or not? The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering that caught the light when I turned it in my hands. Amy Elizabeth Dawson and James Michael Chen request the honor of your presence. I traced my finger over my name on the envelope. Lena Moore's, not Moore, Moore's. My sister Caroline had been signing Christmas cards with my misspelled name for 20 years. Why would my niece's wedding invitation be any different? I am 38 years old, and I have been deaf since birth. The doctors called it profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. My family called it inconvenient. I stood at my kitchen counter, the morning light streaming through the blinds, casting stripes across the invitation. I hadn't expected to be invited at all. Amy and I weren't close. How could we be? Her mother had spent 2 decades ensuring our worlds rarely intersected. The last time I saw Amy was 3 years ago at my father's funeral. She'd approached me tentatively, her hands awkwardly forming the signs for hello and sorry that she must have looked up online. That small effort had brought tears to my eyes. It was more acknowledgement than I'd received from anyone else in the family that day. Growing up deaf in a hearing family meant becoming fluent in absence. I learned to read the shapes of conversations I couldn't hear, to interpret facial expressions and body language like they were their own dialect. I became an expert in what people did when they didn't want to include you. My childhood memories play like silent films. Family gatherings where I sat alone at the end of the table, watching laughter ripple through relatives who never bothered to tap my shoulder and share the joke. Holiday dinners where my mother would sigh when I asked what everyone was talking about, then wave her hand dismissively. Nothing important, Lena. At 16, I announced at dinner that I wanted to be a motivational speaker for deaf children. How would that even work? My sister Caroline had asked, not looking at me but at our parents, as if I wasn't there. She can't even hear herself. My father had cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Maybe something more practical, Lena. Maybe data entry? You're good with computers. They had outlined my limitations so often that I began to mistake them for boundaries. But there was always this small, defiant flame inside me that refused to go out. When I was 25, my boyfriend of 3 years, Mark, ended our relationship. We'd been talking about having children, about building a life together. I don't want our kids to have to learn sign language just to talk to their mother, he said, his words precise and cruel. I want normal. I moved out the next day, found a tiny apartment across town, and took a job teaching at a school for the deaf. There, surrounded by people who saw communication as a bridge rather than a barrier, I began to rebuild myself. By 30, I was leading workshops on ASL storytelling. By 35, I had founded a nonprofit that brought deaf speakers to schools and community centers. We called it Silent Voices, and we were anything but silent. And now, at 38, I stood in my kitchen holding an invitation to my niece's wedding with my name misspelled on the envelope, wondering if I was finally being invited back into the family circle or if this was simply an obligation Amy felt she had to fulfill. Hope is a stubborn thing. It persists even when experience tells you it shouldn't. So I checked "will attend" on the RSVP card and mailed it back. The Westfield Gardens venue was draped in white roses and soft pink peonies. String lights hung from the rafters of the converted barn, creating a canopy of stars above the reception tables. It was objectively beautiful. the kind of wedding that appears in magazine spreads. I arrived early, dressed in a slate blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. The usher looked at my name card, then consulted his seating chart with a frown. He led me to a table far in the back corner of the room, partially obscured by a large speaker stand. The worst possible seat for someone who relies on reading lips and visual cues. My place card was there, with my name misspelled again. At a table with elderly, distant relatives who looked equally confused about their placement. An elderly man across from me smiled sympathetically. "Forgotten family?" he asked, his lips clear enough for me to read. I nodded, returning his smile with what I hoped looked genuine. As the reception hall filled, I watched my sister Caroline flutter about in her mother-of-the-bride finery, never once looking in my direction. My brother-in-law David gave me a quick, uncomfortable nod from across the room, but made no move to approach. The ceremony itself was a blur of distant figures and movements I couldn't fully track from my position. During the reception, waiters served meals, champagne flowed, and toasts were made, all without captioning or interpretation. I sat quietly, eating my salmon and roasted vegetables, wondering what I had expected. Midway through the reception, a small figure slipped into the empty chair beside me. A girl of about 11 or 12, with dark curly hair and bright eyes, wearing a junior bridesmaid dress. She looked at me curiously, then raised her hands and signed. "Are you Aunt Lena?" My heart stuttered. I signed back, "Yes, who are you?" "Lily, Amy's cousin from her dad's side. I'm deaf too." Her signs were fluid, confident. "I didn't know there was anyone else deaf in the family," I replied, suddenly feeling less alone in the crowded room. Lily shrugged. "Mom made sure I took the ASL class at school when she found out you would be here. She said it was important." A woman I didn't recognize, presumably Lily's mother, smiled at me from a few tables away. She raised her hand in a small wave. I waved back, a lump forming in my throat. "Did you do a toast?" Lily asked. "No," I signed. "Nobody asked me to." Lily's face fell. "That's not fair. I wish I could hear what everyone is saying about Amy. I wish I could say something too." I thought of all the times I'd sat silent at family gatherings, of all the words left unspoken between my niece and me. I thought of Amy's awkward but genuine attempt to sign to me at my father's funeral. "What would you say if you could?" I asked Lily. She thought for a moment, her small face serious. "I would say that Amy always makes me feel special, not different. She learned how to sign 'I love you' just for me." Something shifted inside me then, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. The wedding coordinator was moving around the room, checking in with the DJ, making sure everything was on schedule. She passed close to our table, and I reached out, touching her arm gently to get her attention. "Excuse me," I spoke, my voice shaped by years of speech therapy. "I'd like to give a toast for the bride." The wedding coordinator looked flustered. "I'm sorry, but we have a strict schedule. All the speeches were arranged in advance." "Please," I said. "I'm Amy's aunt. I've come a long way to be here." Her expression softened slightly. "Let me check with the mother of the bride." I watched as she approached Caroline, their heads bent together in conversation. Caroline looked over at me, her expression a mixture of annoyance and surprise. After what seemed like an eternity, she gave a curt nod. The coordinator returned. "You'll be the final toast before the cake cutting. Just a quick one, please." I texted my friend Marcus, who was waiting in his car outside, part of our contingency plan if the wedding became too isolating. "It's happening. The speech. Now." Lily squeezed my hand as the DJ announced, "And now, for our final toast of the evening, we have a special surprise from the bride's aunt, Lena Moore." The spotlight found me as I made my way to the small stage area. The room quieted, faces turned toward me with polite curiosity. I could see Caroline's tight smile, my brother-in-law's confusion, and Amy's genuine surprise. I didn't take the microphone offered to me. Instead, I placed it back in its stand and stepped to the center of the stage. The room grew restless as I simply stood there. Someone coughed. I saw Caroline shift uncomfortably in her seat, ready to intervene. And then I raised my hands and began to sign. My name is Lena Moore. I am Amy's aunt, though many of you might not know that. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Some people exchanged glances. Others looked away, embarrassed. One man at a nearby table snickered and whispered something to his companion. Caroline stood up, her face flushed. She moved toward the stage, clearly intending to end what she saw as a disruption. But then the large projection screen behind me flickered to life. Marcus had arrived and connected his laptop to the venue's system, another part of our plan. My signed words appeared as text on the screen, following each movement of my hands. When I was 7 years old, my family hosted a birthday party for my sister. I spent weeks practicing a song I wanted to perform, not with my voice, but with my hands. Caroline stopped in her tracks. The room grew still. When the time came for performances, my mother skipped over me. Later, she explained it was because people wouldn't understand, and it might make them uncomfortable. That was the first time I learned that my voice, my hands, were something to be hidden. I glanced at Amy, whose eyes were fixed on me, her expression unreadable. As I grew up, I was the silent observer at every family gathering, the one seated at the edge of photos, looking in from the outside. The inconvenient family member whose communication needs were too burdensome to accommodate. My hands moved fluidly, years of storytelling flowing through my fingers. The room was utterly silent now, all eyes either on me or the screen displaying my words. When I was 16, I told my family I wanted to be a speaker for deaf children. They laughed. How can someone who can't hear teach others to speak, they asked. I saw my sister's face pale with recognition. What they didn't understand is that there are many ways to speak, many ways to be heard. I paused, my hands momentarily still. I almost didn't come today. The invitation with my misspelled name, the table behind the speakers, these told me what I already knew, that I was an afterthought, included out of obligation rather than desire. Some guests looked down, uncomfortable. Others stared with growing emotion. But then I met Lily today. I gestured toward her, another deaf person in this extended family, watching the celebration without fully being part of it. Lily smiled shyly as a few heads turned her way. And it reminded me of a story about a little girl who grew up believing her voice didn't matter, who was told repeatedly that her dreams were impossible simply because of how she was born. My hands moved faster now, more emphatic. That little girl spent years trying to be smaller, less inconvenient. She learned to nod and smile when people spoke directly to her face, even when she couldn't understand most of what they said. She became expert at pretending. I looked directly at Caroline now. But eventually, that little girl grew up. She left behind the people who couldn't see her worth. She built a life where communication was a right, not a privilege, where her hands could speak volumes. I could see tears in Amy's eyes now. That girl, that woman, now runs an organization called Silent Voices. We've helped over 300 deaf children find their unique way of speaking to the world. We've given TEDx talks. We've changed educational policies. I took a breath. That woman is me. A shocked murmur went through the room. I don't tell you this to make you feel guilty. I tell you this because I want Amy to know something on her wedding day. I want her to know that her awkward attempt to sign hello and sorry to me at her grandfather's funeral 3 years ago meant everything to me. Amy put her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. I want her to know that authentic connection, even when it's imperfect, is the greatest gift we can give each other. My hands formed my final sentences slowly, deliberately. I wish you and James a lifetime of true communication. of being seen and heard for exactly who you are. Because that, more than anything, is what love should be. I lowered my hands. The room was utterly still. Then, from her seat, little Lily stood up. She raised her hands above her head and began to move them in a twisting motion. The deaf applause, soundless but unmistakable. One by one, others stood. James, Amy's new husband, was the first. Then some friends at the bridal table. Then, surprisingly, my brother-in-law David. Soon, the entire room was on its feet, hands raised and turning in the air, following Lily's lead in a silent ovation that spoke volumes. Amy broke free from her table and rushed toward me, her wedding dress billowing around her as she threw her arms around me, sobbing against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said, pulling back so I could see her lips. "I should have stood up for you, with Mom, with everyone." I shook my head and signed. Today isn't about the past. She shocked me by signing back, slowly but clearly. "I want you in my future." Over her shoulder, I could see Caroline standing still amid the crowd, her face a complex mixture of shame and revelation. Our eyes met, and for the first time in decades, I felt like she actually saw me. I didn't stay for this cake cutting. There was nothing more to say, and the moment felt complete somehow. I gathered my purse and wrap, exchanged contact information with Lily and her mother, and slipped out while the celebration continued. Marcus waited for me by his car. "That was something else," he signed. "You okay?" I nodded, looking back at the twinkling lights of the venue. For the first time at a family event, I actually am. On the drive home, I watched the city lights blur past my window, thinking about that little girl I once was, the one who'd been told to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less deaf. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Amy. James and I would love to take ASL classes. Can you recommend something in our area? And lunch soon? Just us." Something unfurled in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. The start of a conversation that had been 3 decades in the making. People often think of deafness as a world of silence. They don't understand that silence has textures, that absence has presence, that voices exist beyond sound. Sometimes the most profound messages require no sound at all. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to raise your hands when others expect you to stay silent. I didn't raise my voice that night. I raised my hands. And finally, they listened.